All right. So this week, we're going to focus on a whole different continent. We've talked about Europe and China, did a lot of Asia, but we're going to take our attention south to Africa. So Africa has an incredibly diverse history. It's first of all, Africa is not just one country, it's a continent. It's also so large that you could fit the United States, China, and Australia within Africa. So, the geography of Africa is quite diverse. In the northern part of Africa, you have the Atlas Mountains, and then you also have the sub-Saharan desert, the Sahara Desert, which is the largest desert in the world. Right underneath that, we call that the Sahel. It's almost like a band of land. It's not quite desert, but it's not quite the lush forest. Lake Victoria is down here. This whole area, this whole green area, especially right there, that's the Congo Basin. That's a rainforest. You have the Atlantic Ocean on one side, the Indian Ocean on the other side, and tons of rivers. For example, the Nile, the longest river in the world, plus several others. There's also lots of desert. The Kalahari's here, the Nubian Desert. Now, there's also Africa is a diverse group of people. You had the Egyptians, which were settled near the Nile, Kush, which are in the southern Nile. There is Ghana in West Africa, Mali also in West Africa, and the Songhai. And then you have Zimbabwe, which is down in the southern part of Africa. All of these are unique and different. That being said, there are certain similarities between cultures in Africa. The first African inhabitants that really began to write things down, or even not to write things down because they had an oral tradition, but became known to other groups of people around 8,000 years ago when they were trading with the ancient Greeks. Now, again, like I said, they didn't actually write down their written records. What they did is had an oral tradition. They just told the history from one person to the next over generations. Now, sometimes we think that might not be the most historically accurate. However, if you look at something like the Iliad and the Odyssey, those were poems that were told for hundreds of years, just told out loud. So, we're going to be focusing in the next chapter on some of the kingdoms, and we're going to stay in here in this West African kingdoms. We're going to focus on Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. But it's important to know that you have other kingdoms as well. You have the kingdom of Kush, the kingdom of Axium, and the Congo kingdom. Now, what's going to bring Africa, like as far as when we look at like major kingdoms, one of the reasons why they're going to achieve such power has to do with the gold and salt trade. Africa is cut off from the trade that was happening in the Indian Ocean and the Silk Road. You see over here. So they really weren't a part of that particular trade. So they had to have their own trade. Now, when the camel was domesticated and they learned how to fit it with a saddle, it opened up trade for basically through the Sahara. This trade network is going to start in the classical age. That's like the time of the Romans and the Greeks. But then it's going to continue. In fact, it's even going to get larger during the post classical age. That's the time of the Byzantine Empire and when Islam was spreading. Now, the Sahara has a ton of salt mines. You have to have salt to stay alive. So, this is a really valuable commodity. In the southwestern part of Africa, they have gold mines. All right. So this is going to be natural. We're going to see the trade between these two commodities. Now, the people of the savannah and the desert, they're going to trade their salt on the coastline here for gold. All right. So if you're living over here in the desert, up here by Morocco, you're going to be trading for gold. Now, basically, you're going to have these really strong leaders, and they're going to be able to establish these kingdoms as strong, independent nations. Now, this is a more modern map, of course, because in ancient times, Christianity did not have this kind of hold. However, Islam is going to be hugely important to Africa. The Islamic traders were coming in from over here in Arabia, and they were trading along the northern parts of Africa. It's going to be the thing that unites them and helps create these powerful empires. This is actually a mosque in Jenne, and it's built so the African kingdoms are going to rely on slave labor, but not the kind of slavery that we think of when we think of like, American slavery. This is going to look very different. Slave labor, they were used to build things, but usually once they had like a term of service and they were released, or they were prisoners of war. So it's not like you weren't worked until you die. Some were, of course, but it wasn't considered that's not the thing to do because having a slave it was expensive. All right. So now that you've watched this brief presentation, I want you to go ahead and in Google Classroom, you're going to see a handout. I want you to do that first. Now that's going to correspond with pages 306 and 309 in your textbook. When you're done with doing the handout, then you're going to do the Google form, just answering a few more questions to make sure that you've done the reading. I have a couple of video links that I'd like you to go ahead and watch. There's not an assignment that goes with those links. However, I think they will further your understanding of the topic. So have a good week. Good luck.